Sam and I went to go see The BoogieMan today, directed by Rob Savage, and it was pretty terrible. I think this movie was a perfect example of how to not make a horror movie. Essentially, it's about a family that is trying to overcome the recent death of their mother/wife, and they are haunted by a boogeyman who basically eats children. The story itself is pretty tired, and you can guess how the movie kind of goes just from that synopsis and even just the title. But what made this movie so bad was the use of jump scares and the lack of use of the monster. Now, obviously in horror movies, it's very common to, the less is more type of thing, but sometimes the less is also less, and in this movie, that was exactly what it was. They showed the monster so little throughout the movie that it just got boring because you weren't seeing anything, and the monster was so uninteresting. You don't even know anything. There's no interesting lore. There's no interesting aspect. The monster doesn't even look interesting. It's just a face that flashes constantly. And the use of jump scares was just so tiring. It was nothing but loud sounds. They relied so heavily on the sound design and the sound effects. You're getting these jump scares, but the pacing of the movie in between is so boring. The plot just seems to carry on and on and on, and in between these loud bangs, there's very little story and progress happening. The character arcs, the teenage girl has this incredibly boring and uninspiring character arc where she's trying to convince her father to accept the death of her mother, and they just execute it so terribly that I found myself really not caring about any of these characters and not caring about the story at all. The majority of the horror sequences were just shots of the characters reacting to what they were seeing. And again, as an audience member, you see very little of the movie. You see very little of the monster. It really feels like a movie produced by a college film student who doesn't have the production to do any sort of art direction or props or anything interesting. Again, it was just so heavily reliant on the post-production. I actually think the child acting for the younger sister's part was pretty decent. The other thing is the little girl has a little light up moon, and some of the scenes, they did some pretty cool stuff where she would roll the ball down a dark hallway, and so their use of kind of using that moving light on the floor to reveal certain scary, spooky things was pretty cool. Otherwise, the movie was really, really dark, like lighting wise. It was like almost hard to see things, and that sort of just became frustrating and then fatiguing after a while. The other thing on a sound design aspect that I did really like is at the very end, the monster, that sort of the climax of the movie, the monster sound underneath the sound of the screaming monster is a heavy metal guitar riff, and so it's like blended really nicely, so it sounds like it's the monster, and it just makes it like almost this like heavy metal sound, and I thought that was really cool and interesting. It was based off of a Stephen King short, but again, the premise is something where I would have to imagine that the quality of the story all relies on the nuance, because a boogeyman that eats children is a story that we've just seen time and time again in all of literature, and they just did absolutely nothing, I think, original in this movie whatsoever. So do not recommend. Overall, I would give it a 2 out of 10.